Well, our news correspondent Richard Chambers is in London for us this lunchtime. Richard, will you take us through the rest of the itinerary for the procession of the Queen's coffin?
Yes, indeed, Colette. As you can see from the pictures which are live from London, Queen Elizabeth's hearse is being pulled by 142 members of the British Royal Navy by hand on foot with ropes pulling the gun carriage which has been used for the funeral of 4 monarchs before her, last used for the funeral of Lord Mountbatten, of course killed in an IRA bombing off the coast of Sligo in the 1970s. But it is being drawn along the Mall. It will pass Buckingham Palace for the very last time in the next few minutes before it is drawn to Wellington Arch and Hyde Park Corner. There it will be transferred to the State Hearse and driven 20 miles outside the capital to Windsor Castle, where Queen Elizabeth spent much of her time. It will be interred there. She will be buried later on this afternoon in the same vault, effectively, under St George's Chapel, where her parents were buried, as well as her late husband, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. Some very solemn and extraordinary scenes around London over the last number of hours. Hundreds of thousands of people lining the streets to pay their respects to a monarch who served 70 years on the throne. Really a golden thread is how it's been described. A living embodiment of what many Britons consider their finest hour, the Second World War, and the height of empire as well, with all the complications that does bring. So people have been here over the last number of days, really to try, first of all, for the lying in state to see and pay their final respects to Queen Elizabeth, and now for the final farewell. Among them, Taoiseach Micheál Martin, who was in Westminster Abbey for today's funeral. He also was one of those who saw the coffin lying in state yesterday. He says he has been moved by the scenes.
In many ways, it's incredible the numbers of people that first of all line the streets, the people queuing, the people lining past the Queen and so on, enormous numbers. It's very moving. And I think it brings to mind in many respects the attachment, the connection between the British people of different generations and Queen Elizabeth. It's quite an extraordinary thing to see at first hand. And we need to appreciate that in Ireland. There was a deep connection there.
Well, it's worth mentioning the security operation which is underway in London as well, described by the former head of the Metropolitan Police as the biggest, the most complicated security operation ever mounted in British history. You have tens of thousands of police members, including those from the PSNI, who have arrived into London to help out on the security procedure, and then tens of thousands of more military personnel, including those involved in the procession moving down the Mall in central London at this point. So really it is for the protection of world leaders, a very complicated procedure to try and secure all the world leaders, get them into Westminster Abbey in the first place, and then get them safely out while London remains on lockdown. Now, for members of the Unionist and Loyalist community, particularly in the north, this is a very special day, one which is very, very sombre and meaningful for them. Doug Beattie, the head of the Ulster Unionist Party, speaking to us earlier on, he does say now it is very much important that the President and the Taoiseach were here and were present to represent the Irish government in terms of reconciliation.
Well, I think respect matters, and I think what we've seen is huge respect. One thing that the Queen did was she was a huge advocate for reconciliation, and I think that's important. Her trip to Dublin in 2011 was an incredible trip, I have to think, and I think it did a lot of good for relationships. And when King Charles came to meet us in Hillsborough Castle, and he met all 5 of the main political leaders, and all 5 of the main political leaders shook his hand and talked to him about things like reconciliation and the environment. So, you know, I think right across the board, I think that there's huge respect, and that's important.
Well, President Higgins and Taoiseach Micheál Martin will now be hosted at a reception for foreign leaders hosted by the British Foreign Secretary James Cleverly. Those leaders from the Commonwealth realms, as they're known, the 14 other countries where Queen Elizabeth remains the head of state, are all being hosted by King Charles. And that is where a lot of the questions hanging over this funeral now lie. This is a huge once-in-a-generation event, one of the biggest gatherings of world leaders, and really I reckon for the British Empire, because as you see actually on the coffin there, you have the imperial state crown, you have the orb and the sceptre with diamonds worth hundreds of millions of pounds sterling, and you have leaders from countries including South Africa and India who want many of those precious jewels returned. They say that they were plundered from their country during the age of empire, and they want them back. And it is that question of whether or not the next time there is a coronation or a royal state funeral, how many countries will have the British monarch as their head of state. You already have countries like Jamaica, Antigua and Barbuda who have said that they are very much heading towards the exit door. So this in many ways is being viewed by some observers as the end of an era for Britain.